I am because I am. And the reason why I think more Indigenous people answering like that is important, it's because we have started to kind of fall into that, what I call scripts and narratives that aren't our own. Like, so my answer to everybody is I wake up every day and live. And that's makes me own that heritage and own that legacy and own that responsibility and relationship. Any culture or any peoples that are really, really close to their lands and the natural world, if you can dig down to the root of everything, the examples lay there. I think the obvious examples for Hawaiians is Kumulipo, right? Are one, not all, not the, but one of the genealogical histories. We are born in succession after all other life. Through those religious practices, down to the familial practices of Aumakua, to just understanding farming and fishing. Like there's definitely those relationships being honored.
The origin story of taro is that the first child of the gods was a stillborn baby and was planted in the earth and grew the first taro. And then the second baby was a human. So relating that our plants and the things that we consume, like taro, are familial, right? Like they're our relatives and they're not just like for our consumption.
Gathering salt was something that families did traditionally, and it's something I do with my kids along the shoreline. When we gather our salt and then we use it to cook with it, you know, my kids can identify exactly where we took that salt from and the ocean it came from, and the taste of that ocean is different than if we gathered it on a different shoreline. People don't really realize that they're eating the dried ocean of a different place every time they cook their food with it. And I like that idea of salt because you don't think of it as something living. Yet when you're connected to the ocean and you realize that you're eating that essence of the ocean, gives it a little bit more concrete example. When you shift your perspective and you don't see your relationships, you don't touch and interact with the environment around you, you forget to treat it like your family. And when we did that to our resources, there was just a shift of mindsets around us. And that's when we stopped caring for our ocean. As you start having these processes come back, as my children know how to gather salt, they're also going to start that relationship again with those areas.
You know, we don't look at land as a commodity. You know, it's a family member. So you have to take responsibility for it. We're not stewards of the land, you know, because you can't be a steward of your mother. You know, you're actually responsible for it. You know, to be a steward of something, you still have a distant relationship. But if you like making kin to it and becoming related to it, then it changes the way you care.
The world has a cycle that's happening around you. Even if you're in a city, the moon still has its own cycle, the sun, the clouds, the rain, and being connected to that, just in those little ways, will help you. It's that intimacy of the world and your expectations of it and your responsibilities to care for it going forward. It's a much deeper aloha than people really understand.
The mainstream world, I don't think they even understand the impacts of the work that they do long term. They're addressing a lot of things through the lens of emergency room care, right? Which is the Western way. Instead of understanding that when you address it in that way, when the force is not gone yet, you don't need the same tactics and strategies, which is a different type of care. And then the end goals of a lot of conservation today are trying to balance the emergency scenarios. So I get it, and I understand it's necessary in some places. I think the lesson of indigenous cultures into that is not so much our relationship, like, oh, we honor the wolf and we honor the bear and we honor the tree kind of thing. But it's like, no, the end goal is balance from those two into one. We know the natural environment infused into our everyday life is the healthiest for us. From every single space, from emotional, mental, right, spiritual, in all of those ways. It's to our benefit as people to be infused in the system. That's, I think, the lesson of indigenous people, but we're not getting there because for so long we're being defined by we dance hula and we paddle canoe, not why and not systems and not the relationship part of it. Reserves, not just one relationship shift. Reserves and closures change the social landscape of a place, and then the land ownership and land access. And then if you want to go deeper into genealogy, we believe that Aina, the things that feed us, our lands included, are familial. And our job as relatives and our jobs within the world is identifying Aina that feed us. And we are no longer allowing family members. We no longer allow our family members to participate in the family the way that we're supposed to.
The thought is not, we're not going to just solve it now. It's for generations and generations and generations. And so that's how I see indigenous knowledge contributing to the science, where science seems to not be as holistic in a way of thinking of the broader sense of the world. You know, the window should be bigger. Why do people think a certain way? Because that's probably the way they were brought up or educated or exposed to. But if we expose them to a more holistic kind of way of seeing the world and respecting it instead of taking from it, then maybe things will shift. I don't think, though, we have a lot of time. I think it needs to shift really quick. And I think sometimes the indigenous perspective is over through time because it has taken time to get where it was. It's just the world has changed so quickly that we have to step it up. We always ask the question, when is enough enough? You know, do people have to have everything? You know, you look at the way Americans live or, you know, Western culture live. Enough is plenty for us. And we just want more. You know, when do we stop and spread it out?
What I'm trying to do is try to take back the what's, those tangible things, and push through to the systems of and the essence of who we are. So the essence of who we are, the ideal, is we are super resilient, we're super adaptive. We had endless faith, innovation. As people, the essence of who we are thriving and productive, and maintaining those relationships to each other, our families, our communities, our lands, our oceans, the natural environment. That's the essence. And if we can continue to honor that, utilizing all of these things to maintain a relationship, for me, that's what's the ideal.
Learning indigenous languages shares with you the values, the ideas, how they see the world. And so in our Hawaiian language, we have the word aloha and we have the word malama. And the word aloha, people hear it all the time and they think about it and they know it means love. And then the word malama means to care for. It means to tend to. In the sciences and in school, I can teach you how to malama something. Just like you can teach someone how to take care of a baby. and how to nurture it and to bring it up. But you can't teach someone to love something. That's something that you have to feel yourself. And everyone loves in different ways. But the only way we'll make a difference in this planet is if we love those around us. And so when Hawaiians talk about how everything around us is kin, the way you care for that kin is different than if you don't. And so that idea of being related to everything isn't just this idealistic, love everyone, love each other, but the responsibilities that comes with love. And the responsibilities that come with that are huge. You start becoming connected to those things. Now you feel empowered to do something about it. And that's something else. That love for it doesn't bring us sorrow. It empowers us to share that love, to make sure that love continues, to make sure the world around us is healthy. And that's that empowering nature of how we deal with climate change and how we deal with the environment around us, that I think is the concepts we need to go forward. Each of us individually can do our best to love the world around us in ways that then nurture it to become abundant and healthy.
The health of the people is really the health of the environment. You can't have healthy people if you don't have a healthy environment. And our people really need wellness. It all is hand in hand, like that, making kin. When one is healthy, the other one reflects it. And then when the other one is healthy, it will take care of the other one. And we're all connected anyway. We don't say we just live on this little boundary thing. No, it extends out and extends up and down, So yes, caring for our environment, which is our elder sibling, is a must.
The strategies put in place are not getting us to an end goal that we have agreed upon. And it's assumed that the value system of that status quo, if you will, is the end goal, and it's not. Native Hawaiians are not trying to close down all of our forests so we can leave it alone and not touch it and just go in through as a museum piece. That's not the end goal. The end goal is production and thriving. And we know that all of these spaces are tended, they're gardens. There's a disconnect just in that concept of ownership and what's tended and what's not tended. There's a level of reverence that increases and decreases depending on the area, but they were definitely tended. We're not just trying to push back because we want Indigenous perspective to participate in doing more harm. We want to get to the point where there's an understanding that there's a big problem in the end goal. And what that translates to when they hear that, when we push back on them, is that we don't want to care for our spaces. And that's not true either. We want to get to another destination, just not that destination.
At some point, we need to step back and give space, because it's not going to be ever done or ever going to grow in the way we envision. And that's sort of the same with science. You go into a space and you have to allow it to breathe and grow into the way of that community's need. So the outcome of these grants or whatever, working with science, is not having an end, thinking it's going to be a certain way, but to allow it to breathe and become much more effective for that community, for the outcome of that community, if you're going to work with community.
Science has to stop thinking of themselves as being objective and realize the subjectivities they bring to it and embrace it. I think each one of us can extend ourselves more and open ourselves more to relationships with the work that we do, with the people that we do it with. And I think we'll all learn how much stronger we are because of that. It's really hard to see through a different perspective. We can read a book about a different culture, but to actually shift your mindset to live in that perspective and in that worldview is almost impossible, because you are raised and you see the world through this lens. And when you're embedded in it, it's hard to see outside of it. And when you're outside of it, you might see that, but it's hard to see it from within. And I think we minimize the hardness of that. The importance of it, we see, I think, and we're trying to recognize.
What is the driving motivation of the research that we're doing? Who is going to be impacted by the outcome of this research? I think these are like questions that really have to be considered, right? Like, science for the sake of science is great, but that's when it starts to become extractive, because we don't think about the social component of how our work impacts people's lives. And I think that's really where we get into this extractive mindset, whether it's on purpose or not.
We just get lost in our reports and our projects and our proposals, traveling, and wish we could just give it to the people who live in their places the way they're supposed to.
I think of research as tools. It's an inquiry process. Aina Momona, that idea of Aina Momona, we all know that that's the goal. However we get there, that's the diversity. And I think too, we have to honor Western science too, because we do. It's just a tool. It's just a tool. It's a tool to help us understand, to problem solve for this end goal. It doesn't define the end goal. Right now, we're stuck in the messiness of that, because scientists are defining the end goal where they shouldn't be. They should be helping get everybody to the end goal.
I don't think that the Western system is ready for this word integration. Because right now, the way that the integration happens in a lot of times is very performative. Like, oh, I had to check the box to have a Native Hawaiian student, or I had to have a female, or whatever. When we talk about weaving, we're really looking at how all of these different perspectives help us to understand the same system. The National Science Foundation and NASA and all of these other government organizations, they're really trying to have like a push for diversifying the field, but still in the way that they allocate funding and the way that we as scientists apply for funding, it doesn't really allow us to diversify the field. It doesn't allow us to put money into community. So I think like there's good intention in what a lot of people want to do, but there isn't enough follow through with the intention to truly, talk about like decentralizing.
There's no traditional word for sustainability, because that's just the way everybody lived. They had to be. But we had words for lushness. We had words for abundance. There is a lot going on with the extraction of knowledge and indigenous people, people thinking that they're going to save the world. And that's not what they're trying to do. They're just trying to save their own places and their own communities. And if we could somehow just fund them to do that and let them be successful, we're going to learn so much from that, instead of always trying to learn from them and funding ourselves to learn from them.
We, as Native Hawaiians and Native peoples, are expected, that have strong foundations in who we are and where we come from, to participate in the Western scientific world, have to go get training. So why does the Western world, who wants to participate in our world, not go get training?
I felt that I would always be in an intro level of teaching culture in an intro way. And to non-natives, so you're always explaining yourself as a native.
Can't consolidate our lifetimes and spit it out to you in a way that you could really understand. As I could never participate in the conversations with researchers that I can if I didn't spend the last 14 years doing the research. So go do the research and go do the background. Before we can have this conversation about Hawaiian research and Hawaiian management and Hawaiian, right, perspectives can be used in conservation and management, figure out what it means to be Hawaiian. The cool thing about indigenous cultures, you don't have to learn about every indigenous culture on the road. Just go one and you'll get it. Not get it the way they get it, but you'll be a little bit more aware. And not anthropology. You know, go take the Hawaiian classes, go take the language, learn the language. Go learn the family systems, go read the books, go do all of the stuff that we've as academic Hawaiians have had to do to have the critical background and experience to contribute. I'm not trying to devalue the steps, but while we're doing the steps, go catch up. We're catching up on this end, you go catch up on the other end.
When you practice culture, even in a physical way, you're decolonizing your mind because you're creating new muscle memory. Sometimes you think it has to be so academic that that's the only way you do it. But I think by practice, you also do it.
Every generation has a challenge and has a success that allows the next generation to tackle another challenge, that allows another generation to tackle another challenge. The hard part about that is each challenge contradicts the last. So what happens in the generations is until that generation dies, they hold back the generation following them because the challenge that they're trying to tackle is a conflict with what they have brought value to the conversation. So we have to sit there and honor a little bit, like, because past generations won't allow the holes to be brought to light to fix the problem, a larger long-term problem. And we don't want to do it either because we don't want to devalue their work. Those are the power dynamics. So it's not only between institutions and organizations, it's between generations too. That's the point. It's not to replicate what two generations saw before. It's to replicate the thrivingness that they saw before. And it might have a different landscape, and it might have different behaviors, as every generation in history has had to adapt and evolve to support Aina Momona in their own way.
I hear from a lot of faculty in my department who have been in the department for like 20 to 40 years that even now, the way that our university has changed the way it talks about Native Hawaiian place of learning, it's changed dramatically. And as a student entering right now, I feel like it's horrible. I didn't see what they saw 20 years ago when we wouldn't even talk about Native Hawaiian stories or Native Hawaiian values. The fact that we even have these conversations now is fantastic to them. So I think we're moving in the right direction. We're just not there yet.
Being an older person and going to meetings with older people, we're pretty stuck in the way we're thinking, and the hope is to rethink and have discussions for the younger people to rethink of how they're going to live in this world. I'm on the exit, right? And who's coming in that has more time, that wants to see how that happens and change for their children. I mean, my hope is we're doing it for the change for our, not even for my children, but for my grandchildren and their children.
You look at the problems of the world, right? We have erosion issues and all of these land loss, land gain. And they are only issues because of how we have chosen to live in permanence. If you have kuleana here and you tend to this place, you can live here through perpetuity. But if you're not taking care of that responsibility and you're not tending that kinship relationship, and you're not engaged in that community collective contribution, then it's hard to navigate.
We are creatures of habit, not creatures of change. Right, because the way we talk about climate change, it's not about how are we going to adapt to the way the climate is changing, it's how do we fix climate change. Because we want it to be like homeostasis. We want it to stay the way it is now. We don't want it to change. But instead, the question we have to be asking is, how are we going to adapt to the climate that's already changing? Because we can't stop it.
Nothing's ever lost. It just goes away. And then when we need it again, it comes back. And the things that I hold on to are the things that are relevant, that I'm using. And I'll concentrate on holding space for that. All the wisdom and all of the things that have gone away are here now, we're needed and relevant and active, right? That relationship, that active feeding and non-feeding. But we also have to update and kind of maybe process that a little different because of the challenges now too. I'm not saying just let it go, like the physical extinction of species, that's a little different. But in some cases, I think we have to address loss a little bit differently. I think we have a fear of loss that is real, but to reassess it and change our relationship with it.
Sustainability kind of almost seems like a limitedness to it. And it almost seems like it's something to keep going, whatever we're doing. It's sustaining what we're doing. Not everything should be sustained. Some things need to be stopped and some things we're just gonna have to give up. And I think if we start talking about the health of our communities, biological, non-tangible, just the health of everything, to me, that's the focus that we have. Because when our people are healthy, then their spaces around them are healthy. There are cycles when things have to pass and move on. And I think there's a lot of money spent in saving individual species, but the culture that loved that species doesn't exist anymore. And that space for that doesn't exist anymore. And that's what we need to be creating, is more spaces of communities that care for things. Indigenous communities and indigenous cultures don't get the support that individual species do around the world. If you save indigenous communities, then the spaces and the areas around them, the ecosystems around them thrive as well.